The most critical voice in your life is not your boss, not your parents, not the person who hurt you most. It is the voice inside your head that speaks to you after you make a mistake, after you fall short, after you fail at something that mattered. That voice, the one that calls you stupid, lazy, pathetic, not good enough, is the one you live with every single moment of every single day. And most people treat that voice as evidence of high standards, personal accountability, or honest self-assessment. The research says something completely different. That voice is not making you better. It is making you worse. It is increasing your cortisol, suppressing your immune function, activating your threat detection system, reducing your cognitive flexibility, and making it harder, not easier, to learn from your mistakes and try again. Self-compassion is not the soft alternative to high standards. It is the neurological foundation of genuine performance, resilience, and growth. And in this video, you are going to understand exactly why, and what it actually looks like in practice. The first thing that needs to be dismantled is the most common misconception about self-compassion, that it is the same as self-pity, self-indulgence, or lowered standards. This confusion is so pervasive and so consequential that it prevents most people from ever accessing one of the most evidence-backed psychological resources available. Self-pity says my situation is uniquely terrible, and I am a special victim of circumstances that no one else could understand. Self-compassion says this is genuinely difficult, and difficulty is a universal human experience that I share with every other person who has ever tried, and struggled and fallen short. Self-pity is self-focused and isolating. Self-compassion is self-aware and connecting. Self-pity keeps you stuck in the story of what happened to you. Self-compassion acknowledges what happened and asks what you need in order to move forward. And critically, self-compassion does not lower your standards. Research consistently shows that people who treat themselves with self-compassion after failures are more likely to try again, more likely to learn from the experience, and more likely to maintain higher long-term performance than people who respond to failure with self-criticism. Here is the neuroscience that explains why. When you make a mistake and respond with harsh self-criticism, your brain activates the same threat detection circuitry that responds to external danger. The amygdala fires. Cortisol rises. The sympathetic nervous system activates. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for learning, perspective taking, and adaptive problem solving, partially goes offline. In this state, you cannot think clearly about what went wrong. You cannot access the cognitive flexibility needed to generate better strategies. You cannot learn effectively. You can only survive, which in the context of self-criticism means defending yourself from the attack, shutting down to protect against the pain, or ruminating compulsively without resolution. The self-critical response to failure is not the path to growth. It is the physiological state that makes growth neurologically impossible. When you respond to the same mistake with self-compassion, with acknowledgement, warmth, and a recognition that struggle is universal, a completely different system activates. The parasympathetic nervous system engages. Cortisol drops. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. And from that state of regulated safety, genuine learning becomes possible. Not because you lowered your standards, because you created the neurological conditions under which your brain can actually access its highest capacities. Self-compassion has three components that work together to produce this effect. The first is self-kindness, the practice of treating yourself with the same warmth, care, and understanding that you would offer a close friend who was going through the same difficulty. This sounds simple. For most people, it is not. Because most people operate under an implicit double standard, they would never speak to a friend the way they speak to themselves. They would never tell a grieving friend to get over it. They would never tell a friend who made a mistake that they are fundamentally worthless. But they say these things to themselves without a second thought, and they have been saying them for so long that the harshness feels normal. Self-kindness is the deliberate practice of interrupting that harshness and responding to yourself the way you would respond to someone you genuinely love who was suffering. The second component is common humanity, the recognition that suffering, failure, imperfection, and struggle are not signs that something is uniquely wrong with you. They are the universal conditions of being human. Every person who has ever attempted anything meaningful has failed. Every person who has ever loved has been hurt. Every person who has ever tried to be better has fallen short. This recognition does not minimize your specific experience. It contextualizes it, placing it within the larger fabric of human experience rather than treating it as evidence of your personal deficiency. Common humanity is the antidote to the isolation that self-criticism creates, the crushing sense that you are the only one who is this broken, this lost, this far behind. You are not the only one. You are one of billions. And that is not a diminishment. It is a liberation. The third component is mindfulness, the capacity to acknowledge what you are feeling without over-identifying with it or suppressing it. When you make a mistake and your mind begins its critical spiral, the mindful response is not to push the feelings away and not to get completely lost in them. It is to notice them with clarity and equanimity, to say this is painful, this is hard, this is real, without adding the second arrow of judgment about the fact that you are in pain. Mindfulness in the context of self-compassion is what allows you to be honest about your experience without being consumed by it. It is the space between stimulus and response, the pause in which self-kindness and common humanity become possible rather than theoretical. The practical implications of this are significant and specific. Research on self-compassion consistently shows that people with higher self-compassion show greater emotional resilience after failure and rejection. They recover faster from setbacks. They are more willing to acknowledge their mistakes, because acknowledging a mistake does not threaten their sense of fundamental worth. They show less fear of failure, because failure is painful but not catastrophic when met with self-compassion rather than self-annihilation. They demonstrate higher intrinsic motivation, because they are pursuing goals from a place of genuine care rather than from the fear-driven place of trying to avoid the self-criticism that follows failure. And they show significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression, because the internal environment of self-compassion does not generate the chronic threat activation that self-criticism does. Here is the practice that connects all three components. The next time something goes wrong, the next time you make a mistake, fall short of your own standards, or face a difficulty that hurts, pause and ask three questions. First, what am I feeling right now? And can I acknowledge it without judgment? Second, is this a uniquely terrible experience that only I am going through, or is this part of what it means to be human? Third, what would I say to a close friend who was feeling exactly this way, and can I say that to myself? These three questions, applied consistently, with genuine intention rather than as a performance, are the entry point into the self-compassionate response that your nervous system needs, and that your performance, your relationships, and your long-term well-being all depend on. This is not soft. This is the most courageous and most countercultural practice available to you, because choosing kindness toward yourself in a world that profits from your self-doubt is one of the most radical acts of self-determination that exists. If you made it to the end of this video, I want to ask you one question. When was the last time you spoke to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply love? If you cannot remember, that is the most important answer of all. Start today. Not with perfection. With one moment of genuine kindness toward the part of you that is trying, that is struggling, that is doing the best it can with what it has. Share this video with someone who is being harder on themselves than they would ever be on anyone else, because sometimes the most healing thing you can offer someone is the permission to be kind to themselves. Subscribe to continue this journey, because the next video is going to reveal something that directly affects your mood, your energy, your immune function, and your mental health in ways that most people completely overlook. The microbiome reset, what your gut bacteria are actually doing to your brain and body, and the specific protocol for rebuilding the microbial ecosystem that determines more about your health than almost anything else. See you there.